Okay, here's a rarity for you. This is called Poleconomy. It, it's an English game, but I believe it was reprinted in Canada as well. And as you can see, it looks like a roll and move, which it is. But the reason that I was interested in this one is I was looking for a game that kind of mixed the political and the economic influences in a very good manner. And someone suggested this. And so I said, okay, let's take a look at it. I saw reviews, comments, etc. that made it look kind of interesting. So I said, okay, let's see what it's like. And at this point, I'm not sure what the answer is. So we're going to have to give it a spin to get some concept. But as I said, it is kind of a roll and move, kind of like Talisman. It's got a two-tiered set of spaces. It's kind of interesting here because, you know, you're going to be looking for properties, but you have some control over which the inner or outer board that you're on. You have a couple of other things. You have an inflation track, which there's actually 3 sets of games in that. There's basically 2 and then a real learning game. There's a basic game and an advanced game. And honestly, it's the advanced game that you're interested in. You have some paper money that looks like it's been designed for, you know, countries that start making money bigger and bigger for inflationary reasons or whatever. I don't know. Italy, the lira, you used to have to unfold them in order to pay for things at times. Anyway, it's just kind of neat. Actually, I don't know. This is about a regular size bill. It's not too far from a regular size bill, but most games tend to have smaller money. You have some different kinds of, you have companies and advertising slots. The advertising is going to work kind of similar to, I can't find any of my games because they're not sorted anymore, but I have fast food franchise kicking around in here. There it is, hiding over there. Everything's just jumbled. Someday I'll get more shelves here and maybe more of my games, or maybe I'll move somewhere else or something. Anyway, trying to get myself into willing to tackle something a little bit heavier, but this seemed like a good step. You'll also have, like I said, the advertising spaces are going to work kind of like they do in fast food franchise. You have company spaces, or company certificates, which match the spaces for the companies. And it's not going to be as exciting as Monopoly. You're not trying to just collect sets of things or anything like that, but there's really not much to the economic side of the game except control of companies gets you income when people land on them, and you can use the advertising to send people places. You have business insurance policy, which allows you to avoid some terrible factors that might come into play. And then you have life insurance policies, which are just a money, sort of an end game. You can buy these. They only cost you $100,000 to buy, and they're worth $1 million. However, early in the game, they're probably not a good idea because 10 times the value, you're hoping to be able to do better than that. You have a little pad here which is going to take care of, it handles your final score, but it also takes care of some information that might be present in the game. I probably won't use that pad. I'll use my own sheets. You have government treasury bonds, which are played differently in different games and different versions of the games. But basically, you buy them at a face value of $100,000, and they'll pay you that in interest every time the bonds come due. And I think they mature at $200,000, but I'm not sure if that's the case in the advanced game. They may just mature at $100,000 in the advanced game. You get your player pawns, a couple of dice. Okay. So the concept behind this game is that you are not only a businessman, but you're also intrinsically involved in the governing of the country. And the business game, like I said, is kind of like a very light Monopoly style game. The political side of it is even lighter, if you can believe that. But it's like a pure negotiation type situation. So let me, unfortunately, they start with the basic game and then start with drawing rules. So let me see what I can get you here. In the most basic of the basic games, you get a fixed amount of money to start, and everybody gets the same amount. In the full basic game and the more advanced game, you start with differing amounts of money. I believe you roll some dice times $50,000 plus $200,000 or pounds, and you just get slapped down on an amount of money, which means, and you're guaranteed not to have the same amount as anyone else. If anybody rolls your number, they have to roll again. Okay. Movement in the game? Well, you have two choices. You can choose whether to roll the dice or not. If you choose not to roll the dice, you can go to one of these 4 special spaces that sit between the 2 boards. You enact that space, and then you'll be able to move off that space on your next turn in either board that you like. Or and that gives you more options of movement. Or you can roll the dice, and then you move that many spaces. Doubles aren't anything special in the basic game. I don't think they are on the advanced either. Except if you roll double sixes, in which case you've had a business disaster. A business disaster is truly terrible. It wipes out everything. You lose all your cash, all your bonds, all your companies, all your advertising. The only thing you're allowed to keep is your life insurance policies, which of course you can then sell back, but yeah. Okay. Now that's pretty damn harsh in the basic game, but the answer to it is the business insurance, which makes you immune to it. It just kills your business insurance. And that's a simple thing that you can buy to prevent that. Of course, early in the game, it may not be worth it. You may need your cash more. You also have to go to a specific place to get the business insurance, which is over here. Okay. The start square is just where all the pieces start, but it also gives you a Lloyd's Bank and a number. Okay. We'll see what's up with that. The different company squares, those look like companies. The advertising spaces have advertising listed on them. If you land on one that's unowned, you can buy them. For the business spaces, it costs you $100,000 in the basic game. That's going to be affected by the inflation. The inflation is going to be a multiplier. So it could be times 1, and that's where it starts the game, but it could go up to times 10. In the truly simplistic version of the game, there's no inflation at all. But that kind of takes everything out of the game. It just becomes a roll and move, collect things, and there's no interest at all. If you land on somebody else's company, you're going to have to pay profits to them. You pay it out of your cash on hand. It's going to be, in the base game, just $100,000. In the more advanced games, it's going to be multiplied by the inflation. However, you don't owe more than you have in cash. You don't have to sell any assets or do anything like that. Yeah, kind of weird, huh? So cash on hand makes you more at risk. Of course, since you get to decide which direction you move in, you probably aren't going to be landing on other people's stuff until the board fills up. There might be worse things that can happen to you, though. If you land on a space and you choose not to buy the company or can't, then it goes up for auction, and everybody except the person who landed there is involved in the auction. The minimum bid on those companies is only $10,000. There's no inflationary effects at all. Advertising squares, similar. You can land on them. If it's unowned, it costs you $20,000. Oh, if you land on your own company, you get profits from the bank. It's just like, I don't know. I don't know what that's like. I don't think even fast food has that little trick in it. With advertising, if you land on an unowned advertising, you pay $20,000. If you don't want to pay that to own the advertising, then it goes up for auction, again, $10,000 minimum. This is again affected by inflation, I believe, for the costs. You don't get profits from owning advertising, however. If another player lands on it, the owner can tell the landing player to go to any company square, which could be on either the inner or outer circuit. They have to go there, and then it's as if they visit that. Now, you could, of course, cut deals to help each other with advertising, but in general, you'd probably want to send somebody to your own companies and get your cash. Now, if the person who owns the advertising doesn't have his own company and you land on their space, they can try to cut a deal with the owner of an actual property in terms of, hey, give me half the money you're going to get for your company from the person I'm sending there. All kind of deals are available here and seem to be pretty freewheeling. The cream spaces, that's going to be income. Now, you're going to have a base income that's recorded at the beginning of the game. Every time you land on one of those cream spaces, you're going to get, and I don't think it's this one, but I'm not sure. You're going to get that multiple of your base income, and your base income is $50,000 times the die rolls. I don't think that's affected by inflation at all, which means that people who don't have a lot of ownership in actual real property get hurt by the inflation a little bit more because they may be relying on that base income money for whatever that matters. There are 3 opportunity squares. Income squares over here, and income squares, let's see, there's 3 of them on the outer circle that are marked opportunity, and those are going to, in addition to giving you the base income, they give you a chance to move to any space on the board that's not an opportunity space. Because otherwise you would just keep hitting the opportunity spaces and draining the bank, right? Okay. Until then, you could go to the one place you wanted. You could go to a different income square, or your own company, or someplace where you could purchase stuff, or whatever you want. You might want to play with the inflation. We'll talk about the inflation squares. So when you land on an inflation square, it's going to move the inflation marker that many spaces. And it's really hard to see, but there's a little arrow on there. I kind of want to draw it in, but this is such a weird game that I feel like I can't do that. So if you landed here on the 2, the inflation would move 2 spaces. That would trigger 2 things. What it says on the inflation space, and now the inflation multiplier is in effect. So like if you moved off 1, things are now double the value or whatever. Okay. The special corner squares, that's these guys. Like I said, instead of throwing the dice, you can go to one of them. Lloyd's Bank allows you to buy government bonds for $100,000 from the bank. Now, the bank doesn't start with any bonds. The government starts with them in the advanced game. In the basic game, the bank has them. And like I said, those are going to create payouts for you at certain times. When the inflation chart hits bonds, the government will have to pay you the face value of that bond again, and they don't buy them back for that. Also, at the end of the game, in the basic game, they're worth $200,000. I think they may not be in the advanced game. I'm not sure. If you land on London Life, you can pay $100,000 to get something that's worth $1 million at the end of the game. You can sell it back to the bank at any time for only $80,000 back. So if you choose to lose some cash, if you need to generate some operating cash. The Guardian Royal Exchange Insurance, this is your business insurance. You can pay $100,000, and now you're protected from 1 roll of double 6s, which pretty much wipes you out. So it's not something you want. And finally, the Guinness Mahon, over here, which are business takeovers. If you land on that square, you can try to take over at half normal purchase price any company owned by another player. You nominate the company you want to take over, you pay $30,000 in takeover expenses, and you roll 2 dice. You have to throw doubles to succeed, and then the owner of the company has to sell it to you at half the normal purchase price. And I assume that involves the inflation. By moving to one of these, now you're able to choose which direction you want to go into the different circuits. And you do not have to choose until after you see your dice roll. Okay. Why are there differences having to do with appointing a banker? I don't think the banker actually does anything in particular. He just manages the bank, and I don't know why there's one in here. Okay, so at the beginning of the game, whether it's basic or not, you roll 2 dice. The total is multiplied by 10,000, and I believe you add 200,000 to that for your starting income for the game. 200,000 plus 4 times your base income. Now, I don't think your basic income ever changes, so this is kind of an unfairness built into the game. For no real great reason, but it helps generate alliances, I guess. Okay, electing the Prime Minister. We're going to ignore the Prime Minister in the basic game because he's got a lot more power in the advanced game and he's handled very differently. So we won't worry about that. Okay, we talked about the concept of inflation. Now the Prime Minister has the chance to change the direction of the arrow on the inflation marker. And he can do this on his own turn. So if it's facing this way and inflation's getting too high, you can turn it this way and try to move it back and get it down again. The Prime Minister always moves first, and he has to decide to change the arrow first before he rolls his dice. And that change of the arrow will last through all the different players' turns. Company are purchased, again, by the multiplier on the inflation number times 100,000. Company profits are modified by the inflation number. Advertising is modified by the inflation number. Opportunity squares, you could move yourself to an inflation square by using the opportunity space, which is the only way you can really kind of force those other than just rolling to get to one, and that might allow you to create a special event and boost inflation. The special inflation squares, okay. Taxation, the base rate of taxation, and this changes in the advanced game at the whim of the government. All players who own companies or advertising squares have to pay tax. It's $50,000 pounds per company and $20,000 per advertising square. And that is not affected by inflation. So the government will be in charge of upping the tax rates if the inflation is kept high. If you land on a bond space, and I'm sure there's a taxation space, you get 100% of the interest of the income on the bond as interest. Okay. If you land on a government salaries space, the Prime Minister and any cabinet positions will be given their salary. The Prime Minister is the only salary that starts the game, and it's 100,000 each time it's landed on. The Prime Minister is allowed, if it would bankrupt the country, to refuse his salary. If the country goes bankrupt, everybody just loses. And you can look at that however you like, but I will look at it in the semi-co-op type fashion, which is losing isn't defined in this game. Winning is except under those conditions. Winning is defined, and the government collapse loss is defined. So, unless somebody's doing very, very poorly, they're probably not willing to collapse the economy in order to get some sort of tie. Oh, look, we all lost. No, that's horrible, right? But that's just the way that I evaluate victory in a game like this. The election. Okay, if you hit an election space, the prime minister is going to have to resign, and there will be a new election. That's all handled differently in the advanced game. Okay, the game ends if the bank runs out of money, or if there's some other way the game ends. Now, so you could decide on a time limit beforehand, or you could just agree that, look, everybody's kind of, it's clear who's going to win or something like that. The winner is going to be your value of money, your company value at its inflation rate, advertising values at inflation rate. Life insurance policies are worth $1 million. Government bonds are worth $200,000. That may change. Business insurance is worth nothing. And if players have any loans, they have to be respected. Okay. So, how does the advanced game change? Well, the big change with the advanced game is that we're going to not... So the elections in the basic game are handled basically by die rolls. Everybody rolls dice. Whoever gets the highest gets to be the prime minister. Now, the prime minister has a little bit of ability, but it's not a whole hell of a lot. But the basic game is kind of this weird random thing where you get to play with the inflation marker. And that's about it. And you get some extra cash. Okay. The advanced game, though, allows you to start cutting deals at a level that you weren't in the basic game. So, the basic ideas that are behind this are the players will be forming political parties and trying to form a coalition government or whatever in order to elect one of their members as the prime minister. There's going to be the bank over here and the government treasury, which I'm going to use this thing for. The government treasury starts with no cash and 30 of these bonds in it. Those bonds are unavailable to anyone unless the government releases them, and in which case the bank will buy them. Okay. Basic income and starting income is all handled the same as I mentioned. Then we're going to open up with an election during the initial part of the game. Players are allowed to form political parties, and they can do that before or after they roll certain dice. Then each player will roll 2 dice, and that's how much political power they have for that election. In order to form a government, players, parties, whatever, have to create a coalition, and this is why I doubt that you'll ever form a political party of any kind of permanence before the government's actually elected. There doesn't seem to be any value to that, but there might be. You might see deals that work that way. In order to form a government, you have to have a majority of the parliament points. Now, if no one can manage that, and you can't cut deals to create that, what ends up happening is, okay, let's do another election. And Parliament's recalled, and everybody rolls new dice and gets new points and gets to put something. Now, if only one player is in the government faction and had, half the political points, well, that's pretty unlikely because you're just rolling dice for it, right? That player will be the prime minister. Otherwise, the party can agree who's going to become the prime minister. If they cannot agree, whoever is in that coalition who has the most votes in Parliament is going to be declared the prime minister. I don't know what happens if you have a tie in this. Oh, when you roll for political power, if you get doubles, you throw again and add all the dice together. And I do not see anything which prevents people from having the same die roll for this. Strangely, income cannot be tied, but the political power can be. I don't know what happens if a prime minister can't be selected from the party. I think maybe you have to have a new election. That would be the only reasonable thing. The banker and the prime minister can't be the same person, but the banker's basically just a non-important role. You're just handing money out of the bank. Okay, so the prime minister's role, one of his big things is that he gets control of the treasury. At the beginning of the game, the treasury's treasury bonds. He can sell those to the bank for $100,000 each. And that goes to the treasury, and he can do this kind of at any time, which means if he needs to raise money to pay off bonds, to pay his salaries, whatever that, he can pay off, he can release treasury bonds in order to come up with that cash. The bonds go into the bank, and then they're buyable from the bank at that $100,000 face value. There's no no cost to releasing bonds to the government. No direct cost. However, this is going to be a debt because the government's going to have to pay interest on those bonds every time bonds come due, and you can see that sounds horrible. But the government does get money from taxation as well, so it's not quite as ridiculous. All right, other than playing with the treasury, and remember, if the treasury ever goes, is in a position where it cannot pay out something it owes other than the prime minister's salary, which the prime minister can refuse to take in that case. He can't take less than $100,000 no matter what, though, unless it's zero, and unless it's in that particular case. If the prime minister is unable to float things, well, then the game ends and everybody loses. All right. So the prime minister has some special powers in addition to being able to play with that sucker. He can appoint members of the government to any cabinet position. Those are unimportant. They're just names and possible incomes. He can sack members of the cabinet. He can change the direction of the inflation marker, as described earlier. He can reduce his own salary to $100,000 or anything under what he takes. However, he can't refuse the entire government salary unless it would bankrupt the government. And if it would, he can refuse it in its entirety. There are other things which he can do during his term, but they require his government to agree with him. He can fix whatever the salary of any minister is. Now, ministers don't exist initially, but when you form a government, you might want to be giving out some perks to people. And $100,000, well, there are lower perks that you could give. The $100,000 that the prime minister gets is probably on the high end of salaries you want to give, but he can sack any member of the wait, I already talked. These are consent. Okay. And players who have a cabinet position with a salary will get their salary whenever government salaries are paid out, along with the prime minister. He can decide who pays tax and at what rate. You don't have to limit it to valuations on the companies and advertising. You could say, hey, John, people with your first name are going to pay $1 million in tax every time taxation comes up. It's perfectly legal. You don't have to raise any funds, though, in order to pay taxes. It's like companies, so you just pay out of pocket, I believe, if I recall correctly. But you can basically destroy players with the tax space if you agree to do so. Yeah, it's only cash available. You can pay money from the treasury to any player or players for any purpose you like. Again, you need your government to agree with you. And there's not much you can do otherwise. And now they babble a little bit about how the PM can like retain support and such not, and keep his economy to exist, and still try to win the game himself as a businessman. The inflation index, okay. For the bonds, 100% is payable always, and you can't change some of the rules, like things like that. You can't say, well, government bonds are worthless now. That would be considered collapsing the country, essentially. All salaries, as well as the PM, are payable from treasury funds, not from the bank. Same as bonds come from treasury funds. Taxation goes to the treasury. If nobody has changed any, rules to say the taxation's a little different, it's going to be the base game one, 50,000 per company, 20,000 per advertising space, no inflation effect. Whenever the election happens, we go through that election cycle. Everybody must resign their positions, and then the new government forms. And of course, the new government, during the prime minister's turn, I believe, he can get that agreement to, dispense with a cabinet position or something. But he's got to assign them at first, I guess. After a new election, though, the new prime minister gets the first term. So, and then you start going clockwise or whatever. I'll probably be going counterclockwise again. And the winner is exactly the same as the full basic game. So the government bonds are worth 200,000 at that point for valuation. So we'll see how it works. It's going to be, primarily based on negotiation and such not. But it looks like an interesting model to hang a simple negotiation game on. I haven't seen something this simple on kind of a government economic model, but people have said, hey, this is about as good as it gets right now. So that's kind of an interesting idea. I would like something where, your decisions affect what your political power is rather than just rolling the dice for it. But at least this gets me somewhat into that realm of mixing those. There was another one, Corporate America or something like that, which handled running a business and government at the same time. But that was just a bunch of random cards to have things happen. Here, at least, we've got a fairly simple negotiation system in place, which I think, is a little bit more interesting. But yeah, I mean, what I really want is something like Silverton on the economic model and a political model that's affected by the economic model. So I guess the closest that I've seen to a game like that is something like Lords of Sierra Madre, wherever I have that hidden. That's up here. That, I don't know where I've got that buried. I think it's actually under the ironclads boxes and stuff. Anyway, this might give me some more ideas towards something that kind of works as a merging of those. Send it up.